welcome back. I have Chris Wolpert with me again, and we're going to dive into a couple topics that employers should probably hopefully be listening in. How you doing, Chris?
Good, Butch. Thanks for having me back again. Looking forward to this next conversation we're about to have.
Yeah, and hopefully everybody that's listening could dive into this as well. The first topic we're going to talk about the stuff we do every single day about controlling healthcare costs, right? And so the workplace is driving, premiums through the roof, and the status quo is out there where the renewals come in, and maybe, the broker goes back and negotiates a few points, and then he's the hero of the day, and then right back at it, and then they pay their premiums for a year, and more, the cycle repeats itself over and over again. And so,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that go into it, and I guess in 2023 that we're recording this podcast and this webinar through that, have you seen more of the same? Like, are some of these groups that you're evaluating for renewals mid-year, are they still going through the same cycle of these cost increases, and they're blindfolded by what's driving the metric other than, I always quick quotes, the cost of services in the area have gone up, so therefore premiums
Right.
have to go up. And so have you, so we're in different regions, but what are you seeing on the West Coast?
Yeah. It's been a lot of the same. Medical trend is still the excuse that every broker likes to give their clients and stuff like that. And this past year was, we saw a lot of pretty high renewals for January of 23 here. So be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, you'd think, you and I have been at this kind of trying to build these modernized kind of healthcare plans that are customized and that are eliminating deductibles and driving up quality and all those kinds of things. And you would think at some point there's going to be some major traction, but yeah, we're still working with, by and large, mostly early adopters, right? There's not a lot of groups out there that are building plans this way. And that's where it becomes a huge competitive advantage for these groups that have. Not only are they improving the financial performance of their plans, but they're also eliminating out-of-pocket expenses for their employees and bringing their premiums down, through that process as well. So, it's interesting. I think that we may start to see that more now, because this last renewal cycle was the first kind of ugly one that we saw since COVID started. So I think that the deck has been reshuffled, and now they're starting to deal. So now we've got, some employers that maybe some of those out there that were more hurt than helped by COVID are going to need to do something now, right? Before it was like, yeah, it'd be nice to do that. It seems like, far too different than what we're used to. We like having this logo on our cards. We're familiar with it. Mm-hmm. They're just comfortable with the status quo because they think there's no other way to do it, right? And that's really the biggest thing that we see. And as I'm sure that's taking place all across the country. I know you've got clients around the country in different regions and things like that as well. And so do I. And so, yeah, it's a lot of the same stuff that we keep seeing, a lot of the same excuses, a lot of the same tired habits that haven't done anything to help control these costs. And again, I think, it's not a CFO or an HR director's fault. They've just been conditioned for years and years, not decades now, to just think there's nothing they can do about it, right? They just have to take the least bad option, shop the market, right? And then just take whatever is the lowest cost, right? That's going to keep make sure that their employees are still going to be able to see the same doctors and so on and so forth.
For sure. Yeah. You mentioned the word conditioned. And so I always preach, like on the podcast and talk about it. The industry taught employers how to purchase their own health insurance, and now we have to unwind it, right? And so people are loyal to their current broker. A lot of times, these brokers have been insurance advisors, where you want to call them. They've been in the industry for 30-something years, right? There's a lot of experience there, right? They read a lot of documents, right? And so, but they're old school, and they don't, they're not up to speed. But they're afraid of risk. They're afraid that something's not going to work. And of course, that nice comfort that you had mentioned, that logo on the card in your wallet, right? It gives, I always say loyalty is only one way when it comes to that logo. And so, it's true, right? They're paying claims, but like there's no loyalty to you. Like they're not saying, hey, hey, you know what? Your group did a good job this year. You guys managed claims a little bit better than the previous year. We're just going to go ahead and lower your premium the next year.
Doesn't happen. Yeah.
Does not happen. And so now one of the things that it actually came up recently on another webinar that I was doing with, he's a fractional CFO. And so we were in this discussion about cost because, some of his clients had a couple questions and we are just kind of brainstorming. It wasn't recording at this point. And I was like, well, let me show you something. So I actually brought up a client's claims report that they get, and this was an annual one. And so I show it to him and he's like, what is this? And I'm going through it and I'm showing him line by line, like prescription cost and ER visits and prescription drugs and like total cost, what was paid in, what's coming out. And he's like, holy smokes, I've never seen this before in my entire life. And we're talking about a guy that's been a fractional CFO for at least 5 years. He's been with several startups, venture capital startup companies that grew to multi-millions of dollars. And he was either the controller or assistant controller, and he's never seen any of this. And have you experienced this similar? I was kind of shocked. I was like, you haven't seen this? Like, you have to at least seen it once. And he's like, no way, man. He's like, you need to get this in front of every CFO in the marketplace because they're not seeing this. They've never seen this. And is that surprising to you?
No, not at all. Not at all. And partly just because what we just talked about, right? If they've had the same broker that's the business owner's, longtime friend, they're golfing buddies or fishing or hunting or boating or wine tasting, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. But so they're friends with these people and they don't really expect that there's anything they can do because that's what they've heard forever. And like you said too, is that they are afraid of that risk, right? But I think the other thing too to keep in mind is that to me it's a lot more it's known versus unknown risk. So like a known risk, for example, would be something like, when you've got a medical trend increase that you are expecting to get an 8 to 10 to 12% increase each year, just because you know that, and that's what you've been conditioned to believe was what's to be expected. That doesn't mean you should accept that. I mean, in my opinion, it's like, why wouldn't you look for some kind of alternative that's out there? Why wouldn't you try to find something different? Again, that is the mentality that the employers are up against in many cases, where or it's something like where if you or I were to go to a group and talk about some of these things, and this has happened to me, I'm sure it's happened to you too.
Yeah.
We talk about some different things that we can do and some different tactics that help us control those costs and things like that. And they take that back to their broker and the broker just says, oh, well, that's too risky. And it's just so easy to just dismiss it by saying, well, that's too risky. What they're actually saying is either A, I was unaware of that solution, or B, I'm not aware of how to actually implement that. Or C, I just haven't wrapped my head around the fact that we just we trot out the same few carriers every year and hope that one of them has decent numbers and just kind of pick that one and get open enrollment going. And then, like I said, then at that point it's, hey, when are we playing golf next or wine tasting next or going boating or fishing or hunting, whatever it is.
Yep.
And for so long, it was very much a relationship business. And I think it still is. But the problem is that until recently, there's no kind of results that are expected. It's all around the activity of, oh, we're shopping the market, meaning we're going out and spreadsheeting a bunch of different numbers and that type of thing. Whereas the result really is, okay, what are you doing to help us control or contain our costs? What are you doing to help us find a different way of financing the purchase of healthcare? And so that's really what CFOs and HR directors need to be able to do is to start to actually expect results out of the programs that are being put in place, true financial results and quite frankly, results that affect the bottom line positively for the first time in this benefits transaction, this employee benefits program, for the first time. So
yeah, and you're right on key, and I'm sure you've met some of these guys. We're not doing this yet, but some of these pioneers out there in our industry, they're actually giving up some of their first year commissions and then bonusing in the second year based on performance, right? So it's actually a performance-based contract. So that way they could put their money where their mouth is, right? And saying, look, if I perform and do this for you, and I tell you, some of these guys, and we've seen it too, where they're on a smaller scale, we've actually seen the healthcare trend go backwards. Like it's not. I mean, it's definitely the first year savings is big, and then it goes backward again because now they have a claims analysis. They can figure out where things are headed. They can implement programs to help offset risk. And so it's and there's another mutual friend of ours, David. He had pointed out multiple times where he talks about there's two components here. You have a funding mechanism and you have an expense mechanism. And a lot of times we focus too much on the funding and we try to manipulate things and get the funding right. And that includes maybe shifting carriers, but we don't control the expense side and the outcome.
Right.
Yeah. And so a lot of times we end up having to do different strategies to help control that expenses or provide employee incentives to lower or eliminate some of that out-of-pocket expenses.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that really is that's the key there. So there's a couple things that you just touched on. I want to definitely touch on. So the incentives are huge. We'll get to that in a minute here. But the other thing that you just had mentioned here was, about how you're, too fixated on the funding side of things, right? And I find the same thing when, there's plenty of groups that we talk to that maybe are already self-funded or they're going into self-funding. And, with using that contract type, you tend to find yourself in a situation where, you're kind of trying to split hairs. You're kind of trying to find ways to keep those costs down. And they end up focusing too much on those fixed costs, right? Those admin expenses, the insurance lines of coverage, all the PEPMs, the per employee per month charges that exist for those admin fees and all those fixed expenses. When what you really want to be able to do is focus on the claims. That's the variable, right? That's the one that you can actually potentially have some changes in and have some fluctuations in, is those claims that happen throughout the year. The problem is we don't know how or when or where those claims are going to come from beforehand. But if we're just focused on the fixed expenses, you're cutting pennies to try and save dollars, and it's never gonna happen. And frankly, the other part of that too is, if you're utilizing the right programs, some of those are going to have a PEPM, or you're going to build those into your program, or your broker's going to do that on their behalf. But they're going to build that into your program. So if you've got a little bit higher fixed fee, that's okay if they're saving you on the variable claims aspect of it, right? So there's a number of things to look at there. But, many times I think that there is this fixation on, well, our fixed fees are X and we don't want to go above that. But it's like, hey, you're overspending on claims. And that's where a majority of the spend is going. And it's also the area where you can have the biggest impact by simply focusing on those claims and on those results, like we were just talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other, what that allows you to do, again, going back into the incentive piece of it, is a lot of those programs that we're sponsoring, that we're putting in and baking into our health plans. The reason we're doing that is because they have incentive programs for employees to actually use them. Because we've all seen, I'm sure you've seen it, Butch, just like I have, there's a great new shiny object, right, that we can roll out, and it's going to help every employee, and it's going to save them money, and it's going to improve the value of the program and all these things. And then it's not communicated to employees. They don't understand what it is. They don't understand how to use it. And so all of this excitement ends up getting lost because there hasn't been any kind of proper communication. There hasn't been the incentives in place for the employees to actually seek out and participate in that aspect of their benefits program, right? And that, to me, is just, it's a waste. It's a waste of all that momentum and time and money and everything. So, it's definitely important that the incentives are for the first time ever aligned with the employee, and thus aligned with the employer.